Hello, dear listeners of the Storytelling Podcast. My name is Richard. I'm 37 years old, and I'm an artist. For a long time, I considered myself a fairly happy person. I had a beloved job that brought in a decent income, a wonderful wife, Melanie, and two wonderful children, 8-year-old Adam and 5-year-old Sophie. But life is unpredictable, and sometimes one fatal mistake can cross out all the good that was in it, plunging you into an abyss of shame, lies, and suffering. Today I want to tell you my story, a story about weakness and forbidden passion, a huge sense of guilt, and attempts at atonement, about how the desire to comfort a loved one turned into a betrayal of one's own family. It all started about a year ago when my wife's parents got divorced. They had been together for over 35 years, and their separation came as a real shock to all of us. Melanie's mother, Jane, took it the hardest. She seemed to lose her purpose in life overnight, plunged into depression, cried all day, and didn't leave the house. We were extremely worried about her. Melanie constantly went to her mother, trying to console and encourage her. I also tried to support my mother-in-law as best I could, visiting her whenever I had the chance, bringing her groceries, helping around the house. Gradually, Jane began to thaw, talking to me at length, sharing her feelings. She told me how lonely she was, how much she missed having a man by her side, and complained about her ex-husband's infidelity. I sincerely sympathized with her, convinced her that she was still young, beautiful, and would definitely meet a worthy life partner. I must admit, I have always admired Jane, considering her an incredibly attractive and charming woman. Slim, with a sculpted figure that many younger women would envy, with a mane of curly chestnut hair and radiant green eyes, she looked at least 15 years younger than her age. Jane exuded a special sensuality and grace, but at the same time, warmth and kindness. When talking to her, I felt an amazing emotional comfort, a kindred spirit, as if we had known each other our whole lives. Our conversations would drag on for hours, and we could talk about anything, from the subtleties of painting to philosophical matters. With Jane, I was genuinely interested. She seemed to charge me with her energy, giving me inspiration. Every time I returned home after our meetings, I felt an unprecedented surge of strength and creative ideas. I didn't even notice when I started finding any excuse to visit my mother-in-law, to bring her groceries, help with repairs, or just chat. I spent all my free time with her, painting her portraits. My loved ones only encouraged my care for Jane, seeing how she was improving. Gradually, our communication took on a different dimension, more intimate, more trusting. We became true kindred spirits for each other, sharing our most intimate thoughts. Jane told me how she and her ex-husband had grown apart in recent years, how she felt unwanted and unloved, and I vividly described to her our perfect marriage with Melanie, which had long since turned into a voluntary cohabitation without any spark or passion. For hours we could discuss our unmet needs for intimacy, the desire to feel special to our partner. Imperceptibly, our relationship grew from a family one into a close friendship, and then into an attraction bordering on flirtation. I began to catch myself unable to think about anything but Jane. I eagerly awaited our next meeting, marveled at her every word, gesture, and smile. I admired the chiseled features of her face, the curves of her body, inhaled the subtle aroma of her hair and perfume. I froze from the accidental touches when our hands met. A strange aching feeling was born in my chest, and my lower abdomen grew heavy. At first, I drove these sinful thoughts away, understanding how unacceptable they were. I convinced myself that I was just carried away, gave in to emotions, that it was a temporary lapse. After all, I was happily married, we had a strong family, 2 children, and Jane was my wife's mother. I had to keep myself in check at all costs. But alas, the heart cannot be commanded. My obsession with my mother-in-law grew in geometric progression. The abyss of attraction kept pulling me in stronger and stronger. On that fateful evening, Jane and I were having our usual conversation in her kitchen over a glass of wine. Engrossed in our discussion, we didn't notice the darkness falling. As Jane walked me to the door, she leaned in for a farewell kiss. I don't know what came over me, but instead of the usual peck on the cheek, I crushed my lips against hers in a long, frenzied kiss. I was frightened by my own boldness and the whirlwind of feelings it unleashed. Fearing a slap, I pulled back, but in Jane's gaze, I saw only the mirror reflection of my own burning desire. She exhaled convulsively, pulled me towards her abruptly, and whispered, "Stay." In that second, all rational arguments evaporated, leaving only a mad, irresistible passion. How we ended up in the bedroom, I hardly remember. I remember the rest in snatches, as if in a feverish delirium, clothes torn off in haste, scorching skin touching, the whimsical play of moonlight on the sheets, the sweet languor that flooded my entire being. We dissolved into each other, forgetting everything in the world. I worshipped Jane's body, reveling in every curve, every cell of it. What I experienced was incomparable to the usual marital intimacy. I basked in Jane's desirability and responsiveness, burning with unimaginable pleasure. She responded to every movement, every caress with amazing sensitivity and abandon. Our beings, bare not only in body but also in soul, intertwined in a mad dance of passion, becoming one. The ecstasy I experienced was so all-consuming that it almost caused pain in its intensity. It seemed as if eternity itself dissolved into these mad rhythms of lust. In the morning, a realization of what had happened overwhelmed us both. The thought that I had betrayed Melanie, tarnished our marriage, simply killed me. No, I couldn't just erase my wife and children from my life like that. Gathering the remnants of my sanity, I told Jane that it was over between us, that what had happened was a monstrous mistake, a flash of madness that must not be repeated, that we should stay as far away from each other as possible before it was too late. My mother-in-law nodded gloomily, clearly avoiding meeting my gaze. Hurriedly getting dressed, I rushed out of the house, swearing to myself that this would never happen again. The days dragged on in agonizing shame and self-flagellation. I tormented myself with thoughts of my own vileness, cowardice, debauchery. Looking into Melanie's eyes, hugging her, kissing her, sleeping in the same bed. All of it was incredibly difficult, as if every touch of my wife dealt an electric shock. At the same time, I longed terribly for Jane, for her scent, her voice, the warmth of her body. I was torn by contradictions. On the one hand, I wanted to flee from my mother-in-law to the ends of the earth, to erase her from my memory and heart. On the other hand, as soon as I closed my eyes, hot memories of our intimacy would surface, her ragged breathing, her supple back, her rounded buttocks. Lust would overwhelm me, clouding my mind, pushing out moral arguments. At night I would toss and turn sleeplessly on the rumpled sheets, and if I did drift into a restless slumber, it was only to see Jane, sinful, alluring, sweetly moaning in my embrace. After a couple of weeks of this torture, I gave in. Throwing caution to the wind, I rushed to Jane's under a contrived pretext, supposedly to pick up forgotten brushes and paints. As soon as the door closed behind us, we pounced on each other like starving beasts. We shed our clothes on the way to the bedroom, not even trying to discuss anything. Words were unnecessary. Eager hands, intertwined bodies, frantic kisses said it all. God, how I missed the taste of her lips, the trembling of her silky skin under my fingers, the quiet cries of pleasure. We made love with abandon, almost roughly, as if for the last time, until we were raw and breathless. But even this sweet torture could not slake our frenzied thirst for intimacy. From that meeting on, a double life began for us both. During the day, I pretended to be the perfect family man, a caring husband and father. At night, I would rush to Jane's to snatch a few more stolen moments of passion. We met everywhere we could, at her house, in my studio, in cheap motels on the outskirts of the city. We made love feverishly in the backseat of the car, risking being caught. I reveled in our sinful intimacy, unable to get my fill. With Jane, I felt incredibly alive, desired, special. I dissolved into her, forgetting everything in the world. She became a breath of fresh air for me, an outlet, a salvation from the corrosive family routine. At the same time, the forbidden affair was destroying me from within. The burden of guilt and lies weighed me down like lead, poisoning my very existence. I caught Melanie's puzzled looks, noticed her frowning when she saw my detachment, absent-mindedness, frequent late nights at work. The children missed me, didn't understand why their dad was so rarely home. My friends joked that I must have taken a lover. If only they knew how close they were to the truth. Every time I left the marital bed under some pathetic pretext and slipped out of the house to meet Jane, I hated myself even more. But I also couldn't end the destructive affair, put an end to our relationship. Jane had become a drug for me, one I couldn't imagine my life without. Very soon, my rendezvous with my mother-in-law was no longer a secret. Either we became too careless, or it was that proverbial woman's intuition. But Melanie began to suspect something. She would stage ugly scenes of jealousy, showering me with accusations and interrogations. She would sniff my shirts, searching for foreign scents. She would secretly check my phone, email, trying to find evidence. Of course, I denied everything. I repeated like a mantra that I loved only her, that everything was fine between us, that I was just working late because of some sudden commissions and preparing for an exhibition. I lied through my teeth, getting tangled in my own stories, and I hated myself for every deceitful word. Every time I looked straight into my wife's eyes, which swam with pain and distrust, I wished I could sink through the floor. My heart was torn apart by shame and disgust with myself. But I also lacked the courage to confess, to tell the whole truth, plunging Melanie's world into chaos. I was caught between a rock and a hard place. On one side, my beloved wife and children; on the other, a passion that robbed me of reason and will. Very soon, you can't hide a cat in a bag forever. The dirty secret was exposed in the most shameful way. On that fateful morning, lost in a daze, Jane sent me a rather explicit email to my home laptop, describing our latest steamy encounter. Unfortunately, Melanie saw it first, deciding to check her email. Recalling that scandal is still painful and shameful. My wife cried so hard that the walls shook, screaming that I had betrayed her with her own mother, crushed their love and trust. She threw things at me, thrashed about in hysterics. The children huddled in corners, frightened, not understanding what was happening. Burning with shame, I tried to get a word in, begged Melanie to calm down, but my desperate attempts to explain everything only fanned the flames. On that same day, after throwing her things into suitcases, my wife took Adam and Sophie and went to stay with her parents. I paced around the empty house, torn by contradictions. On the one hand, I felt a monstrous relief that I no longer had to hide or pretend from anyone. On the other hand, I was overwhelmed by a chilling horror at the realization of what I had done. With one wrong step, I had destroyed everything that Melanie and I had built over the years: trust, respect, the warmth of a family hearth. I had trampled on our feelings, hurt my closest loved ones. And for what? An unworthy affair, giving in to uncontrolled lust? Despising myself, I sat for hours on the floor of the nursery, turning my children's favorite toys over in my hands. Burning tears of shame and remorse streamed down my cheeks. I was torn by the desire to fix everything, to beg for forgiveness, to piece our shattered happiness back together. But I realized that such a thing was unforgivable, that by so treacherously deceiving my wife, betraying the mother of my children, I had forfeited the right to call myself a husband and father. The next couple of weeks passed in a fog. Melanie refused to see or hear me. She changed the locks, ignored my calls and messages. Like a cursed man, I rushed around the city, visiting our mutual friends in the hope of finding out anything about her and the children. I begged my father-in-law and mother-in-law to make their daughter see reason, to give us a chance to talk it all over. Jane didn't answer my calls either. Apparently, torn by guilt towards her daughter, she had decided to cut off all contact. I was left completely alone with my demons. My work wasn't going well. My friends shunned me. Only alcohol brought temporary oblivion, allowing me not to think, not to remember, not to torment myself. After a month of hellish torment, I firmly decided to quit my pathetic self-flagellation. I had to stop drinking. That had to end. If I wanted my family back, and I really did, I had to pull myself together. First and foremost, I made an appointment with a family psychologist. For the first time in my life, I spoke so openly with a stranger about my fears, insecurities, about running away from problems and responsibilities into an attractive mirage. I tried to figure out what had driven me to an act that could only be called vile. And I realized my affair with Jane had become a kind of crutch, a straw that a weak-spirited person clutches at, a breath of fresh air in the stale atmosphere of everyday life, an attempt to prove to myself that I was still a real man, strong, irresistible, and desired. But you can't simply run away from real problems in your relationship with your wife, everyday difficulties, routine, and monotony. At least not by betrayal, for which you would have to pay a heavy price. Melanie and I didn't see each other for the first time until a month and a half after the exposure. She came to pick up some of her things. At the sight of her haggard, tired face with reddened eyes from crying, my heart clenched with pain and remorse. Swallowing the lump in my throat, I began to stumble through apologies, begging her to forgive me, to give me a second chance to fix everything. I said that I had never loved anyone but her, that my affair with Jane had been a monstrous mistake, a moment of weakness. Melanie listened in silence, her arms folded across her chest, piercing me with a piercing gaze. When I ran out of breath, she hissed, "How could you betray me so vilely, Richard? To trade our feelings, our marriage, our children's well-being for a fleeting affair? How can I ever trust a single word from you again? What kind of example are you setting for Adam and Sophie?" Then she softened, adding wearily, "I don't know if we'll ever be able to recover from such a blow, to heal the wounds from your betrayal. Right now, all I want is to shield myself and the children from pain. Stay away from us, don't traumatize us any further." With those words, she left, leaving me standing in the living room like a petrified statue. At that moment, I realized with particular acuteness that I had destroyed the most precious thing in my life with my own hands, the trust of the woman I loved. I had trampled on our relationship, our dreams, our plans for the future, causing unbearable pain. And I hardly deserved forgiveness. I spent the next few weeks in agony, eating away at myself, torn between remorse and longing for Jane, who had become almost a kindred spirit, scolding her for not resisting, for letting herself be drawn into the whirlpool of passion. But most of all, I hated myself, for my weakness, my lack of will, for thinking with the wrong head, for being swayed by the call of the flesh, for failing to resist temptation, for trading the happiness of my loved ones for a handful of sinful pleasures. Now, 6 months later, the acute wounds have more or less healed over. Melanie and I have begun to restore a semblance of communication, if only strictly about the children. She graciously allowed me to see them on weekends, to take them to the zoo and the movies. Every time I met Adam and Sophie's wary, childishly resentful looks, I was ready to sink through the floor with shame and guilt. I understand that even if my wife can someday forgive me, it will be impossible to erase what happened. The echo of my betrayal will still quietly reverberate in her soul for a long time, tainting our kisses with a bitter aftertaste. Only time, patience, and painstaking work on our relationship can restore at least a part of what was lost. But I have firmly learned, any difficulties in a marriage need to be resolved together, through open discussion, not by dousing the inner fire with the gasoline of affairs on the side. When alienation sets in, you crave thrills, or your feelings seem to have cooled. Remember what made you fall in love with each other in the first place. Fight for your love. Give your partner attention. Arrange romantic surprises. Woo them with words. It is only through daily emotional work that the durable alloy of truly strong bonds is forged. And if you realize that the relationship has run its course, that the feelings have irretrievably faded, be honest. Part ways with dignity, without crippling each other's and your children's lives. Adultery is not a harmless hobby, but a one-way ticket, a road leading to catastrophe, full of pain and mutual recriminations. Is fleeting pleasure worth shattered trust, self-loathing, your loved one's tears? The taste of forbidden fruit invariably turns to the bitterness of wormwood. Don't lose your head in pursuit of an illusion. No matter how tempting the flesh, always think about the consequences. Keep your destructive desires in check if you don't want to cross out your past, present, and future all at once. As for Jane and me, after the scandal, we never saw or spoke to each other again. We understood. Continuing our relationship after what happened was unthinkable. Even if feelings still smoldered, the chance to be together was lost forever. Too high a price would have to be paid, destroying the lives of so many people. I have come to terms with the fact that I must let her go, even if the thought of her still makes my heart ache and my stomach churn. Thank you for listening to my confession. I have been through real hell, paying for moments of selfish pleasures with years of suffering, and I continue to pay the price. I hope my sad experience will serve as a warning. Make someone stop in time, step back from the fatal line. To ponder the fact that the search for imaginary happiness on the side inevitably turns into the loss of what is most precious. to remember the vows taken at the altar, to rekindle old feelings. Cherish and care for your loved ones. Speak openly about problems. Don't withdraw into yourself. If something is bothering you, don't run off to seek solace in someone else's embrace. Fight for the relationship in which you have invested your soul and years of your life. Draw strength and inspiration from your chosen one. Indulge them, surprise them, thank each other. And with all your might, drive away the temptation of adultery, no matter how sweet it may seem. Remember, it will corrode your soul and fate more thoroughly than strong acid. Love your partners. Remain faithful, honest, worthy. This is the key to happiness. Yours, your chosen one's, and your children's. Forgive minor grievances. Don't accumulate resentment. Build your world on trust and acceptance, not fleeting pleasures. Be happy and don't repeat my mistakes. Thank you for your attention.